Welcome back, Red Spotters, to another show here on the Red Spotlight Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host today, Alexis J. Soto, and I am joined by Mr. Peter Martinez, who apparently, if I can top the other introductions, he's God, people. God himself, Peter, is here. What are you doing today, Peter? How you feeling?
Hey, I think we can still work on the intros. They're getting a little bit
Master
better.
of the universe, ruler of fate and right and wrong. Everything he does is what everyone should do. And I don't know what else. I just called you God, for Christ's sake. What more do you want from me?
We'll work on that.
Oh my
God. They need a little work. That's all I'm saying.
Speaking of blasphemy, we'll get into that. Welcome to today's show. This is Red Spotlight number 199, people. Wow. Oh, wow. I'm the only one apparently wowed by that. Are you, Peter? Probably not. This is the penultimate episode before our 200th show when this began back in 2014?
For our 200th episode, we will be having you guessed it, Barely News Crew / Red Spotlight Entertainment reunion episode, in which we're bringing everyone back that's ever been a part of this, and it's a roundtable discussion, and it's going to be great.
First and foremost, I hope everybody got a good laugh out of this, who listened to that, because everything that Peter just said was pure and utter fiction. And people laughing know it, because there will never ever be such an occasion where anyone would be successful in gathering all of the people that had been involved in any of the projects of which you had mentioned. But since you bring it up, for our 200th show, we're going to have a very long conversation, and Kyle will be on it, and there'll be some cool stuff. So listen in to, it'll be dropping on Thanksgiving Day, so it'll be dropping over the holiday weekend while the rest of us are either working, eating, or killing people to get to our Blu-rays at Best Buy for Black Friday, if we get that chance. So yes, in today's show, we are going to conclude our Scorsese files, as we've been calling it here, where we go back and look at the history of wonderful films that have been made by Marty Scorsese. I don't know what it is, maybe because he's been in the news and people have been saying this lately, but I feel it sounds better saying Marty Scorsese than Martin Scorsese. It feels a little bit less informal.
It's a Martin Scorsese. You do not know him. You do not disrespect his name.
Anyway, speaking of Marty Scorsese, if you listen to our previous installments, we did do, in our first episode, the films King of Comedy, New York, New York, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, and Mean Streets. In our second installment, we did The Departed, Gangs of New York, Casino, and Goodfellas. And today we have, it's going to be interesting because we have an actual robust list of movies in which all of them are seemingly the complete polar opposite of the other. We have 4 films that we're covering today to conclude our Scorsese series right before The Irishman is dropped on Netflix. I'm sure it's getting if I'm not mistaken, The Irishman is playing in some select theaters as we speak. But it hasn't gotten, maybe because a lot of people already reviewed it a month ago, but I guess we'll get into it once it drops on Netflix. And today's films are really what we would call new Scorsese, in that we're into the 2010s. And the 4 films that we're covering today are The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013, Silence from 2016, Shutter Island from 2010, and Hugo from 2011, all of which had varying degrees of performances. I can tell you off the bat right now that the biggest box office successes that he's had are The Wolf of Wall Street and Shutter Island. Maybe it has something to do with Leo, maybe not. And the 2 films that completely were disasters, in which not only they lost money, but they only lost money, which was Silence and Hugo. And if I'm also not mistaken, all of these films were distributed by Paramount. And I would only lead to assume that the disastrous performance of Silence led to Paramount passing on The Irishman, which was a home that Scorsese seemed very comfortable with. As far as accolades, Wolf of Wall Street was showered with a lot of Academy nominations, as well as Hugo. I do believe Shutter Island got something. I'm not entirely sure what that was, but it wasn't anything contentious. And Silence, which was all but ignored with one sole nomination for cinematography. So that's how those films performed, and we're going to get into it right now, but I think it's important to say off the bat because it can be mentioned ad nauseum. When we're talking about films made by Martin Scorsese, as we have for the past 2 episodes, it can get redundant, so to get this out of the way with, these movies are all great. These movies are all shot brilliantly and beautifully. These movies are all directed masterfully. All of these films have amazing performances. So just getting that out of the way with all 4 of these movies. Before we get into our first film, which is Wolf of Wall Street, do you have an overview, Peter, about what you can say about these 4 films? You called them the miscellaneous.
I enjoy all these films. I think all these films are really good. Why I would label them miscellaneous is because they are all very different, especially in comparison to everything else Martin Scorsese has done his entire career. They're not only different from what he's done his entire career, but they're also very different from each other.
So the first film we'll be talking about today is The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013, and Peter will have a synopsis, presumably, to tell us about what...
Earn, spend, party. A New York stockbroker refuses to cooperate in a large securities fraud case involving corruption on Wall Street, corporate banking world, and mob infiltration, based on Jordan Belfort's autobiography.
Would this be considered a biopic?
Yes.
It doesn't feel like one, and I think just because it does that, it succeeds in a way all on its own.
Well, he did the same thing with Raging Bull.
Which is also, interestingly enough, because I rewatched Raging Bull after I rewatched Wolf of Wall Street, and they're kind of the same story.
Somewhat.
I didn't mean that as a bad thing. I'm just saying that there are a lot of similarities between the rise and fall of Jordan Belfort and Jake LaMotta. They're not the same people. They didn't have the exact same circumstances, but they definitely have a similar rise and fall story in this sense. This was my first Scorsese film back when it was out in 2013. And this is probably what's going to be an interesting paradigm when we discuss on today's show about this film in particular is that while this movie may be maybe in the eyes of you and I the least among the films that we're covering today, I have a suspicion that perhaps in the years to come, this might be one of his most liked or loved movies of this new wave of films that he did in this decade. And I only would imagine that be the case because of just how much fun this movie is. I mean, this is about as entertaining as Scorsese can get. And it is a 3-hour-long film. But man, I don't know if it's just the nature of the film, but this movie just literally pumps your blood with so much testosterone and so much adrenaline that you almost get sucked in to whatever you're watching this movie, and you're doing crack, you're fucking doing all these quaaludes and everything, and you feel like you're part of these, if I do say so myself, disgusting and abhorrent group of people who are doing vile things. And yet we have fun watching these disgusting and vile human beings.
I think it's so popular because people, they like it. They like that lifestyle. They're like, oh yeah, bro, they're party. Da, 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 da. They enjoy the hell out of it. It's the same way they worship rich people and, singers and rappers and all that shit. They love it. and this is like distilled perfectly down into film form. And it is fun. It is entertaining. It's a great film, I feel. It's funny enough that you say you think it's similar to Raging Bull, because I think it's most similar to Goodfellas or Casino. Like, those are basically the same film. Those, like, the same template of film for three very different characters.
No, I agree with you. Again, I compared it to Raging Bull because I saw it immediately after the other, and I picked up on similarities. But in terms of tone, it's most closest to, I think, particularly Goodfellas, because both of those movies have, they do a great job of showing off that lifestyle. Perhaps in excess, but that's what that lifestyle requires to show in a film like this.
Marty likes complicated characters, but he never likes to judge his complicated characters. And that's what I think he does a good job at. With this one, Casino, and then Goodfellas, it's all about these people that, you know, hit it big, doing some less than favorable things. And yeah, they had a great life, exciting life. And then they lost it, but they never really paid for their consequences of living that life. And the film doesn't necessarily judge them for it either. It just sort of presents what happened. And I find that really interesting. Because you know, in the 2000s, or like in the 80s or whatever, it's like, okay, what's the like character that you could point at that's like, oh, that's the bad lifestyle? Gangster. 2000s? Wall Street.
I think it's appropriate. I don't think it's funny. I think it's real. I think, I mean, speaking on my behalf, I'm sure you have your thoughts on it too, but like, this to me really just reinforces why I can't stand Wall Street. I can't stand people that work in Wall Street or this entire market. Because I think it's not, I would say, the point of the movie, because the point of the film is the story of Jordan Belfort. And you're so right about how Scorsese really doesn't judge these characters. And he lets you make up that mind. And I think that's something that's, I think, if I can say so myself, rather wise of him to do. Because, as you and I know, there are many people in our lives, many people in general, that love to jump into a situation where they can judge others. And it's quite interesting how we have somebody in Martin Scorsese who has a deep background in the Catholic faith, who does film after film after film, story after story after story, in which he has these very complicated characters, where many of them do some very morally questionable, if not downright bad things, and yet still he goes out of his way to create some sympathy for them.
Well, he makes them human beings. He doesn't make them caricatures. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important.
So I think that's absolutely important and something to note here as well. But as far as, you know, in particular, The Wolf of Wall Street, it's, and getting back to what I was saying about the whole Wall Street practice in general, it amazes me to this day how long, from what, I mean, the film, as it begins with the introduction of Matthew McConaughey and Jordan Belfort's first day as a stockbroker and, you know, getting inducted into that whole cohort, I mean, they say it themselves, like, this is a fucking scam. Nobody knows what the fuck the market even is, and it can go up, it can go down. Who knows? Our job is to just steal as much money from the American people as possible because they're willing to spend it. And to me, it's just amazing how this institution continues to survive when so many examples in recent history, they are found to be based in absolute fraud. and theft. And yet none of these people are prosecuted. None of these people are put away. And for whatever reason, they keep coming back. And it amazes me to no end the everlasting ignorance of this country that we let them do that. When this movie shows you exactly the kind of human being that is created from...
Greed is good. Like, when you talk about, like, arrests and stuff, like, specifically, like, the 2000, was it 8 or 9? 2008 crash, which was very much created by them selling homes.
The housing crisis. The housing crisis. It was a whole thing. I think The Big Short went into it. If you want to see that film, remember The Big Short? Yeah. And they went into the whole thing where it's like people were buying homes, they were loaning, I think, money, and then the people couldn't pay it back.
That they very clearly could not afford. Yeah, that whole issue. But as for the movie aside, like, again, it is interesting to watch these cast of characters that are just like kind of low life and sleazy, and they find this niche thing that they can do, that they can get away with, and their rise to the top and then subsequent fall. It's also very entertaining, in their mindsets and who they are. And again, it's one of those things. I agree. It's like the film doesn't judge them. You, the audience, can judge them as to how you feel about them. And I know there are some people that come out and they're like, "Damn, that's my hero right there," which I find interesting.
I find disgusting, but I mean, that's to each his own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's disgusting, but I don't know. It's hard to come up with a lot of things to say with this one. I really like it. It's just more of like, it's entertaining.
It's endlessly entertaining, I'd even say. And it does, I feel, a good job of building and building and building. Like, the movie kind of just gets more and more, like, the madness kind of accelerates the further.
Yeah, that's one thing. They push the madness pretty far, which is great.
I think it works because the more and more crazy things get in the movie, really, I think it coincides with Jordan Belfort getting, like, deeper and deeper and deeper in shit. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this film. In regards to the scenes getting bigger and bigger, I mean, I was just, wow, we're really going here. This scene, I think late in the movie, they're on their yacht in Italy. I think it's Italy. And they need to race to Switzerland because the aunt just died and need to liquidate whatever assets that she has over there or pick up whatever money. And they literally try to sail through a hurricane or a storm or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, how do you survive that? Like, they literally, I think, didn't the whole yacht just, it sunk, right? It tipped over, and that they were rescued. But that whole sequence was just like, what the fuck did this just turn into? It was a wonderful sequence. And it's just like, and Marty does this really well in all of these movies where it's just a controlled chaos. It's really hard. Yeah. I think for me, like, Schindler's List is the best example of this, in the sequence where all of the German Jews are being essentially forced out of their slums and being arrested and put into camps. That wonderful, horrifying and wonderful sequence where these people are just being assembled and shot every which way. It's so hard to do that because when people say a controlled chaos, you make it look so real. It doesn't look directed. It looks like it's just happening on its own, parameters. It's great. And this happens not just in that sequence, but also an earlier sequence in the film. One of the first true, I think, signature moments of the movie where Jordan Belfort is on, in his office, is the first, like, big offices. We have all these people. He has, like, this fucking, like, MC mic set up where he's, like, really getting into it. By the way, Leo's fucking great in this. Really fucking great in this movie. And he just like, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger when he like announces like, oh my God, we made this much money. He brings out a fucking marching band that's completely stripped of their clothing. He brings out strippers, waiters, like it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like he does a great job of selling this lifestyle, but it's like from a directing standpoint, whoa. I mean,
it's a lot of plates to keep spinning at the same time.
Could you yourself imagine being on top of that many, like, just bodies in the same set? Like, this is huge from a perspective.
No. Well, I couldn't direct shit, so, like, no. But, I think the fact that he's capable of keeping that escalation of the lifestyle without it just falling apart and becoming Looney Tunes. And it's just like, holy shit, what am I even watching now? But like still feeling consistently real. Like that's what's hard.
Well, the Quaalude scene, the famous Quaalude scene.
Yeah.
Or the lemon scene where it just hits them all of a sudden, where Jordan and Donnie, portrayed by Jonah Hill, who's also great in this movie, completely lose it. And that's also a very hard thing to direct, right? Because you have these two actors who, hold on. It's very hard to direct that because you have these two actors who are great and you can depend on that. But also, of course, how the camera is showing off how the effect of the high is on these people. You also just have Jordan mad at Donnie because Donnie fucked up with John Bernthal. And then later the scene ends with Donnie choking on what was it, turkey bologna or something, and it was just like, what the fuck? Like, it's brilliantly orchestrated how these things happen, and they're just so outlandishly hilarious in almost every which way. Similarly to, I think, Goodfellas and what you mentioned before. I think another thing to pick up from this, at least from me, again, other people may have other perspectives, and I appreciate that, I guess, because
I guess.
I mean, in terms of what they're getting out of the movie, right? And what I get out of the movie is enough is never enough. It's like there are so many opportunities where Jordan literally ripped off millions of particularly working class, middle class Americans. And that's where he made his fortune. And he could have not only kept it, he could have kept his family intact. He could have kept his estate intact. And all he had to do was just resign. And that alone would have kept the FBI from pursuing a criminal investigation. Instead, because of not just his ego, I think it was mostly his ego, but it's also the fact that he feels so entitled to having the figure that he has right now as far as his wealth. Mm-hmm. He refuses it, and everything is fucked over.
Just like every one of these stories, these guys are responsible for their own demise. Their attitudes may have brought them all this, wealth and power, but their attitudes are also what destroyed them in the end. And the question is, was it worth it? And I'm sure, that's the question that a lot of the characters have at the end. And it's funny because for most of them, the answer will be, yeah, it was.
And maybe the ending here is where I think a lot of these vulture capitalists get their rocks hard on, it would seem, where in the end of all of it, he only gets, 3 years? He gets coddled. It looks like he's having a good time in prison. Then he gets out and then he has a career as some celebrity. And it's like,
sell me this pen.
I have no empathy for any of these people. None whatsoever. And especially with that ending, because I think it's a great ending. Because it shows the damned hypocrisy of the people of our culture in this country. Because we have an individual in Jordan Belfort who, in my opinion, should get no amount of empathy for stealing money from working class, everyday Americans. And it's not just him, it's people like him who have continued to do so. And yet, what happens when they get caught? They get a slap on the wrist. Maybe they get
Yeah.
and then they continue to live out whatever the rest of their lives with a good amount of the money that many of the people they stole from will never see in their lives. That's why it's so maddening to me. And so many of these stories that we see again and again and again, where like, you know, in a way to break the cycle, if you're going to commit high theft, grand theft, if you'd say, and if you're going to acquire millions and millions and millions in wealth, it just seems to me that people always fall to the cycle of greed in which you inevitably end up in the worst position possible, but you're still off pretty well, especially in this fucking country, especially in the 21st fucking century. Even that point, it was the 20th century, but still, I just think it's so obvious from an outsider like me who would never engage in these kind of activities, how you break the cycle. And again, I keep pointing back to is there were so many times where you could have just stopped and said, you know, I'm good. I've got more than enough money than I'll ever spend in my entire life. You know, I'm an American success story, but no, I'm.
But that's not who some people are.
That's not who those people are. Let's be clear about that.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I said some people. I find them to be fascinating stories.
I agree with you.
That Martin Scorsese excels at.
A lot of them cautionary tales, if you look at it that way.
Well, again, that's what's so great about the film. It depends on how you look at it.
But it's great, and I'm happy it got love, and I'm happy because we got great stuff from Leo and Jonah Hill. I love Rob Reiner in this; he's hilarious. It's also just in a way, and you're right when you point out how it touches a little bit cartoony, but it's not. But it's like, to me personally, and I don't know how you. I know it was hilarious, and I know in a lot of these scenes, and I mean the scenes where they're in the main business office, and like he's on that like dais, and he's like saying all these like outrageous things, and everybody just, there's something just so to me off-putting and grossed out by a lot of these grown men willfully acting like buffoonish gorillas and jumping up and down and like oofing and offing, and like I think at one point
but they were successful.
At one point, Rob Reiner was like, "What the fuck is this? Like the jungle?" Like people were literally like jumping up on their desks like monkeys, and it's like, what is it about our nature as human beings that we can be so easily led by somebody to do these things? You know, it's interesting.
Money.
Fuck money. That's how I'll end this. Anything else to say about Wolf of Wall Street? We didn't mention Margot Robbie. This is like her first big role, right?
It was, her breakout role. She was great. Margot Robbie's great.
That's all you can say, really. Great film. Let's move on to, I don't want to bring it down too quickly. Let's do Shutter Island next.
Oof. It's funny that you say you don't want to bring it down, and then you pick Shutter Island.
Silence is much more of a downer. Let's just be real about that. So Shutter Island, released in 2010. Interestingly enough, this film is quite a hot take, it seems. I've looked at some ranked lists of the Scorsese filmography, and there were like, I think, 2 lists that had Shutter Island at the near bottom, if not the very bottom.
Wow.
And on the flip side, there were people I follow on Twitter who are close to the industry that were like saying that it's time for us to stop acknowledging the fact that Shutter Island is not Scorsese or top tier Scorsese, saying that Shutter Island is top tier Scorsese. So there are some interesting opinions as we've gone on. This movie has been out for almost 10 years, it looks like. I, of course, saw it a few weeks ago. And as with most of these movies, I ended up loving it quite a bit. It is the closest, I'd say, to a horror movie that he does. And let's get to your synopsis, Peter.
Yes. Someone is missing. World War II soldier turned U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels investigates the disappearance of a patient from a hospital for the criminally insane. But his efforts are compromised by his troubling visions and also by a mysterious doctor. Bum bum. The soundtrack's great.
It definitely is. And how fitting for a great movie. Look, this is kind of, and I feel like I have to say this with every single movie, but like, I don't know if I think you define this as a thriller / horror film. It definitely leans into some horror aspects, but, and definitely in terms of how beautifully the film is shot and how it looks like, but what a mind fuck of a movie this really is. And I do mean that in the best way possible. Because I'll just definitely put it out there. The ending is not what I expected in the least. But like what all great films do that build up to a truly worthwhile twist, they telegraph and they tell you exactly what is going on. Without you even realizing it. There are many context clues that build and build and build.
It's a mystery film.
Absolutely.
I think that's also a first for
Scorsese. Yeah.
It is somewhat horror. It's a mystery film, of course, with Mr. Leo at the forefront. And it can also get very surreal because as the film progresses, he continues to have these weird visions that you're not exactly sure who's in them, where they come from. But as the story slowly unwinds, you get to learn more and more. And it is somewhat like a horror. Like, it's textbook horror, old-timey insane asylum, a missing girl, the police come. Like this, the what's it called? The plot of the film feels like it could be like a horror video game. You arrive on this island and you have to investigate.
It feels like a B movie.
Yeah. Well, as far as like the horror-like elements, I felt they were very effective.
I agree.
I don't know about you.
I agree. I think the whole setting was very effective in terms of how it was shot and in terms of how it was arranged as far as the sets are concerned.
There's this constant foreboding and this feeling of distrust for everything and everyone involved. And you feel that the same way that the character feels that. It's a really great sort of falling down the rabbit hole type film, where you're just slowly peeling back the layers to the story, and the twist is a doozy. It's a classic twist, but I think it works very well in this film, and it also provides something to say about the character and the film specifically. Yeah. I really love this film. It's honestly, I think it's one of my favorite of Scorsese's, and I don't know why it's viewed not as highly for some people. Because I think it's expertly done.
I think it's great, honestly, and the film unfolds in a way that I feel becomes better and better as it goes along, and especially once the big thing happens, it's like, whoa. And I mean just whoa. It completely recontextualizes every scene you'd seen beforehand. And it kind of becomes a new movie. Like the whole thing is completely upended. And I love feeling like that. I love when especially films of this nature do that. Mystery, thrillers, whatever. What say you about it? I love it when, I'm not of the sort that resorts to saying that, oh, you really needed a twist there. It's like, okay, I could have figured that out. Well, first of all, fuck you. Second of all, it's like, look, twists can be a gimmick. Twists can be bad. Joker. But they can also be sensationally outstanding. And if I were to like name a movie that did this in one of the best ways I've ever seen, it would be this movie. Because I didn't see it coming. I honest to God didn't see it coming. Did you?
No. But I think the way to have an effective twist is, one, there has to be a point to the twist. You have to be saying something.
Yeah.
About
not
the
just
character
to do it for twist's
or
sake.
about the story. Yeah, not just a twist for twist's sake. You have to be saying something with said twist, for one, and then two, I feel like the twist has to be recognizable. So if you go back and look throughout the film, you notice clues where it's like, okay, now that I know the twist, I go back and rewatch the film and go, oh my God, it was staring me in the face the whole time. And some people, they're like, well, I need my twist. I don't like people to like find out the twist, so they just basically kind of lie, and the film sets up completely for one thing and then they make it something else, but it makes no sense as to why it's this other thing. And that, I think that provides a very ineffective twist. I'd rather a viewer figure out the twist before it actually happens than they not figure it out because it just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
I understand. I agree completely. So leading up to it. So first of all, I mean, of course, you have Leo, interesting, paired up with Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo was great in this film as well as Ben Kingsley. I think the movie does a good job of selling you on this whole like notion that I forgot. I think not Danny Elfman, wrong person. Leo's character in this movie.
They're not even similar. What?
No, it's just, there's a Danny something name because his name is backwards. Remember, like he gives his alternate personality.
Yeah. The alternate.
It's something Danny whatever. I think of on the chalkboard or whatever it was arranged. The film does such a good job of selling you on this because by the time it comes, it's like whoa. But then it's not just that the twist happens, because I was just completely thrown off balance, because I was like, at first, when Ben Kingsley is like there in the tower, and I'm like, oh shit. Like, I was kind of convinced by the time we got to that movie that I had bought in to Leo's delusion.
Yeah.
That they were going to pull a switcheroo and convince him that he was crazy when he wasn't. But no, the opposite was true, in which he is crazy. And the dreams that we have been seeing are what caused that madness. And it's such a crazy fucking sequence, right? Because like the entire time, you don't want to believe that it's true. Like you yourself are in that situation of Leo's character where you're like, no, that's not true. You're trying to fuck with me here. This is what happened the entire movie. But then ever so slowly, it dawns on you like, oh shit. Holy fuck. They got me. This guy fucking created this fantasy and they went along with this delusion. And I didn't even want to believe it until the very fucking end. Like, whoa.
Well, because they build it up so well. Like, from the moment you get there, you're hearing whispers about, what's going on at that lighthouse. What's really going on behind the scenes. And then people go missing, and then they're found. And then, every time he's convinced, like, oh, I guess nothing is going on, something else happens, he uncovers. And so by the time there's this grand buildup to him reaching that lighthouse, and then when he gets in and it's just what's his name just sitting there at a chair and a table, Ben Kingsley, and just breaking it all down for him, like, this is our attempt to cure you, to help you realize the delusions through which you're going through. And it's an amazing twist. It's also very sad and also very not emotional, but like tragic, but also human.
Yeah.
And that this is actually a caring place. That they are attempting to help him. But the horde isn't coming from this place or the world, it's coming from himself. Um, and again, I really love the ending. Like, the ending's really great, where you realize that he was cured of the delusions, or he was really broken for that cycle, but he lies because he just can't live with himself for what happened and what he did and who he is. And he says that last line to the Incredible Hulk. Is it
Wrong movie.
is it whoa, what are you talking about? This is a Mario film. Um,
He wasn't Edward Norton.
Yeah, oh yeah, it wasn't Edward Norton. Is it better to die as a man or live as a monster? And he made his choice.
Yeah.
And then pulls back, boom, boom, on the island and everything. Oh God, it's such a good little tale, so to speak. It's like the greatest Twilight Zone episode ever made.
It feels a lot like that, and you're so right about that ending. For a moment you think, okay, well, this guy's gonna be okay, and then but then he seems to snap back. But then as he's walking away, he pretty much gives a very suggestive exchange with Mark Ruffalo. And I think Ruffalo's face should be, in my view, enough signaling to the audience, like, yeah, this guy's willingly choosing to be lobotomized, which, whoa. I mean, lobotomy is, I think, the most haunting example I've seen of lobotomy. Not that we've seen the procedure itself, but think back to BoJack Horseman. BoJack's mother.
Yeah. You basically become a zombie. You're kind of on autopilot a bit. Like, it's bad. It's
he's choosing to die. He doesn't want to live anymore, basically, is what happens.
Of course his performance is great, but I do think is also great throughout the film, which is something I don't really think Martin had done in previous films, is these like very out there dreamlike sequences in which he's having these hallucinations, and
they're great, weren't they?
They're really well done, and they can be very terrifying. But there's also a point to them. You're slowly uncovering who he is and everything that's going on, and the way they flash back to his wife and his children, and his time in the war and the atrocities he saw,
right, yeah,
and the atrocities he committed, and the way they're just sort of like scrambled in his head. They sort of lay over one another, and they can sort of get jumbled. And throughout the film, they slowly start to become clearer and clearer. That I thought was really well done, and it adds to the mystery of like, what the fuck is going on? Who's really being honest here?
Right, and the film does a good job of selling you on like not to trust anybody. But to speak to what you mentioned about what you were saying in those scenes, and the scenes where we keep coming back to him and his wife, the music is beautiful in those scenes with the wife. And then also the scenes where he is shown capturing a concentration camp and seeing what I think the best way you could describe it, these melted bodies that are just rotting and left out there. Melting, or what?
They're not, they're frozen. They become basically icicles.
Right. It horrific. Absolutely horrific. And you understand why this person
broke.
Exactly. And you buy the fact that he broke, because it wasn't just that, but it was not just the atrocities that he himself saw, but also just the torment that he's been through. And it's like, you talk about, on the other hand, with Jordan Belfort, who you have no empathy whatsoever, but for this person, there's an enormous amount of empathy, because he had a wonderful family and a wife and 3 children, and his wife killed them. She drowned them. And then in an act of grief, he killed her. And when he kills her, he's not happy about it. He's destroyed by having done that.
I mean, who wouldn't be? It's so good.
I don't know what to say. Like, is there anything that you were gonna throw a bone to people who don't like this movie? I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm not. Well, did you see any of like the reasoning behind why they don't consider it as good?
Not really. I think maybe they just maybe some people thought it was a bit cheesy. Maybe it was beneath Scorsese. That's it. Maybe it wasn't impressive enough. I mean, okay.
I thought it was extremely impressive.
I was blown away watching the movie. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, and I think we're gonna if we had nothing else to say on this, we're gonna probably say the exact same thing about the next film.
Oh yeah,
in terms of how we reacted to it as well as how it was received, and that was his 2016 film Silence, which I should say nobody saw.
Yeah, no one saw. Okay, Silence. Two Jesuit. Oh no, wait, sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I forgot the tagline. Pray with your eyes open. Two Jesuit priests travel to 17th century Japan, which has under the Tokugawa shogunate banned Catholicism and almost all foreign contact.
Did you see this back in 2016?
I saw it on Blu-ray.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
my father had purchased it to
okay.
watch. I was like, oh yeah, let's watch this. And it was great.
Well, let's get into why it's great.
The action scenes.
Oh,
the CGI.
Yeah. The costumes.
The costume. Well, the costumes actually are great in this film. It's recently your first time watching it. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start with how I felt about it?
I'd rather you start, and then I get into it.
Okay. Actually, before I saw this, I had seen some reviews where people are like, "Well, yeah, it's good, Scorsese, but it's a little eh." It's sort of like, how people say like, cold pizza is still pizza. It's sort of like that with Scorsese being the pizza. That's the way I saw a lot of people approach this film. Which then I saw the film and I was like, okay, this is pretty fucking fantastic. Okay. And I watched it, and for one, like, a lot of people found it overly long and boring, and I don't know where that came from. It's a long film, but I found it unbelievably entertaining. Like, it kept.
Well, I wouldn't say entertaining. I would say captivating.
Captivating, sure.
That's
a better word.
Yeah.
But I was glued to it the entire time, and I never was like, "Ugh, it's kind of slow. Let's wrap it up." Like, no. The situation is fascinating. The time period, the people involved, everything going on, very fascinating. It was a very, maybe being Catholic helps, because it's a very personal religious journey with a lot of allusions to the story of Jesus Christ itself.
And for full reference, Marty, of course, comes from a Catholic background. Both you and I come from Catholic backgrounds. So
yes.
A lot of the stuff is familiar to us.
Yes. And of course, we're both grew up in Japan, so this is a lot of.
Oh no! You can't say that. We can't say that. That's we did not grow up in Japan. We grew up on Tatooine.
We grew up on Tatooine. That's true. It's a film that I think you can immediately tell was very personal to Martin Scorsese, and you understand why he made it. He's
been trying to get this made since the 80s.
You know what I've noticed with all these films is, fuck, does Martin know how to end a film? Because with a lot of these films, it's really the ending that just wraps it up so perfectly for me, where I go like, yeah, like, okay, this was a journey. And this film, we won't get into the ending yet because we got to get more into everything else. But by the time the credits rolled, it's like this was a religious journey for the director specifically, and for all that either grew up religious or have struggles with religion. You can completely understand what Marty is going through when making this film. If you're atheist, it's probably like, it's a good enough film. I think you can still connect with it.
I think for the most part, except for one moment in the movie, or maybe two moments in the movie, you can be perfectly atheist and love this movie. Because it's interesting because we're talking about a film that is heavily focused on exploring faith and religion, especially in this interesting situation that we have here with the Portuguese Jesuits of the Catholic Church introducing their faith into. I really have to put my phone away because I keep getting alerts and like, what are you doing, Peter? Introducing their faith into Japan, which has its own culture, its own history, and as they repeatedly say, their own religion. And to me, what I find fascinating about this is that, it's a movie that has a lot of, interesting and I would say substantive discussions about the role of religion, pro and con. And it's not a faith-based film because it's not propaganda per se, because I think it does a pretty well job of facilitating a wonderful debate about whether or not it was right for these priests to come into a foreign land and try to sway them into their own way of thinking. And to me, it's an interesting film to explore because as I have grown older, it to me as somebody that comes from a faith of Catholicism, and something that I think is wonderfully stated in this film is whether or not, even though it is essential to the religion to spread the gospel, as they say, the word of God, to me, as I've grown older, I've kind of grown to be a bit resentful about the notion that, we're right about everything and everybody else is wrong, and they'll be damned unless they conform to our way of thinking. And you know me, I hate and loathe that type of thinking. I'm not atheist. I'm not religious anymore. And I haven't been for a long time. And in many ways, because of the arrogance that the church has and has shown and is, really. And of course, other kind of things that we've explored, like films like Spotlight, which are atrocious, in exploring a different hypocrisy of this institution. All of which is to say is that there are some great points that are made here by the Japanese who are doing heinous acts in this movie, but they have their reasons. Not justifying it clearly, but continue.
Well, no, I was going to say it's like with all of Marty's films, we brought this up many times. It's, he tries his best never to fully condemn any one person or any one side.
Right.
He views everyone as humans, and all humans have their reasonings. He'll give you the reasonings for why they're doing it. He's not saying that it's okay that they did it, but this is the reason why they did it. So that I find very interesting, and I think you can also argue a little bit less about. This film is maybe a little bit less about religion specifically, but about morality.
Yeah, exactly.
And when is it right to kneel or betray one's beliefs? Especially if it's to help other people. Betraying what you believe to help others, is that correct? Is it not correct? The title Silence, of course, has a lot to do with what happens in the end. it has multiple meanings.
The silence of
God.
Exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
That they bring up multiple times in this film. How, they cry out to him and all they hear is silence, and all the atrocities and all they hear is silence. So that is the more religious aspect of it. It's delving into belief and faith, and is it there, is it isn't there, when they talk about the silence of God. And then also, is it a betrayal of God to turn your back to him to save these people? And again, that's where the more moral question, where it's like, do you betray your beliefs if it means saving others?
It's almost like a crux, right? Because when I was watching some person that had this interpretation, that one of the things that is being said with the journey of Father Rodriguez, portrayed by Andrew Garfield wonderfully in this film, who at some point begins to look like a Jesus archetype, which I'm sure is very much intentional.
Of course.
Yeah.
The story itself very closely mirrors,
which is what he wanted. I think it's said many times in the movie that these Jesuits all want to emulate a life that Christ had. So, I mean, he's basically getting what he wanted in the most fucked up way, but hey, there's that. But what this person was saying about us, what one of the things that Scorsese was saying in the movie, is a key distinction between faith and religion, in the sense that while, yes, Father Rodriguez apostatized in the end, he never stopped believing in God, and he had that faith with him to the day he died. And what this person was saying, maybe perhaps in his own perspective, was that, well, therein lies the crux of religion itself, is that, and maybe where I kind of fall into, and maybe I think most modern sensibilities fall into, is that perhaps it's better to be spiritual, maybe not so much religious. And in that sense, because what the Catholic Church was trying to do here, and what they've done throughout all of time in history, is to convert. And there were some excellent points that were made by Father Ferreira, who apostatized, portrayed by Liam Neeson here, that the Japanese never really believed in the Christianity that Ferreira and Rodriguez knew it as, that the Japanese had their own distortion of the Christian faith that made their faith, in his view, not valid. Interesting points being made, and we see that happen earlier in the movie, where Garupe, portrayed by Kylo Ren, there was a moment where he was screaming, and I was like, did I hear Kylo Ren in there? Yeah, I heard Kylo Ren. Where Garupe is impatient and he's frustrated at the confusion of the Japanese because there's a Christening that's happening, or a baptism, if you will. And their assumption was that paradise, heaven in a way, was that it was going to come to them now, that all of their suffering would end in this moment. And that was not true. So fascinating points, I'd say, being made in the film about whether, again, not judging or condemning anyone fully, but challenging everybody involved in this. And it starts to really kick into high gear when Rodriguez is captured by the Inquisitor, who I want to shout out here because the Japanese actor Issei Ogata, oh my God, was he great as the Inquisitor in this movie. Like, look, he doesn't, I think it's also impressive because this guy doesn't really speak much English at all, from what I saw from the behind the scenes. And, I mean, yes, there's an accent, but he was understood perfectly. And also the voice was just perfect for the character. There's just something haunting, slightly evil, and then also in a way kind of righteous about him. And in the fact that he's not coming from a place where he, as he says himself, that he sees Christianity as a disease or a curse, but that because he loves his country and because he doesn't want to see his country be, assimilated into other cultures' religion, he persecutes them and wants to rid his country from these things. Of course, he does some awful, evil acts, I would say, but that in and of itself is how I think, in an interesting way, right, the Christian faith makes out the devil to seem, is that he comes as a friendly face. And he did treat, I mean, I guess you could argue it, but he didn't necessarily physically torture Rodriguez. He emotionally tortured him, which is a difference here. But your thoughts on the Inquisitor in this movie?
I agree with everything you said. I thought he was great. I think he was portrayed perfectly. Again, there is a bit of I don't say intimidating, but like what's the word? Sinister undertones. But he never stops feeling like a human. It again never becomes a cartoon villain. Always stays human, but there is always something sinister about him, and of course the things that he does to rid the country of what they Catholicism and the encroachment of the West, or not the West at this point. It's
well, I guess Europe.
Europe.
At this point in 16th or in the 1600s, Japan was this new thing to Europe, and you know how Europe, the imperialistic attitude of Europeans, which somehow has transferred over into America. Different podcast. But of course, they show up and they start acting as if they own the place. And historically, the beginning of this Inquisition was in a way to push back against these foreigners from ruining the purity of their culture, which we see time and time again throughout history. It never fucking ends. I would even say Ogata. I'm sorry, I'm gonna put it out there. I think he should have been a contender for Best Supporting Actor. What a fucking performance that was! Just wonderful as an actor in doing that role.
Well, if what's his name would win for Bridge of Spies, then yeah.
And Mark Rylance, I argue, was great. Although you and I have differing views on that, of course. There are other performances that have won that. I think you can point to as having no merit whatsoever. Do you not remember? I think, what's her name? Remember the film Silver Linings Playbook by David O. Russell? Remember the actress that played Robert De Niro's wife?
Yeah.
She got a nomination for Best Supporting Actress, which many were like, what? Exactly.
I guess.
So, yeah.
You know, the Academy, they just fall in love with their films and...
Yeah, anyway, ignoring their existence again. So, the film is... I think some people criticize this movie for being dour, and I'm like, duh, okay. That's not really a negative to me. It's kind of what the point of it was in some way, to make you feel that way. It's not... It's the complete polar opposite of what Wolf of Wall Street and Goodfellas are. It's not fun to watch at all. In fact, it can be grueling. It can be hard to see what is happening. I've said to you in our conversations that this is Marty's Schindler's List, because of the heinous atrocities that we're seeing people not only being tortured but being executed in some, I guess you could say, biblical ways in this movie. And it's a difficult watch. How did those sequences land with you?
Yeah, I landed very well for me. I agree with you in that it's not an easy watch. There is some harrowing things done in this film, a lot of torture and a lot of hopelessness. But there are also certain moments of beauty that they pepper throughout that I think, help the experience again, especially that ending. And then it also, the contrast of such heinous things happening in such a beautiful environment as Japan.
Yeah.
Because Japan itself looks like paradise. And a lot of the places in which this takes place. I want to talk about the ending.
Let's do it.
What happens is, he finally, through having conversations with Father Liam Neeson, he finally, he's standing over the picture of Jesus, I believe. They have like a little picture of Jesus they have on the floor.
Because
and
part
it's
of the thing in the movie is that a religious test that the Japanese have imposed on accused Christians is if they step on the mantle, they are excused. If they do not step, they are executed.
And what they're doing with the priests is they're not killing the priests because they know that the priests love that.
Well, they did
that's
at
what
first.
They want.
They did at first.
They did at first. Mm-hmm. But the priests, like, that's the best thing you could do for them because they're like, yeah, I'm living as Jesus would. I'm going to heaven. Like, it's kind of fulfilling.
Which is another layer, right? Because the Japanese are very shrewd about this. It's like they know Christianity. Or they caught on to it. And that's why they're so successful in the psychological torment they put them through.
Yes. That's another reason why they appear so sinister. It's not just like, we're going to kill you. It's, we're on to you. We're going to psychologically torture you by the torture and killings of your followers. And they'll cry out to you and they'll ask for your God and your God will be silent. Like that's how they do it. And it's like, holy shit. It's dark stuff. It really is. But you know, he's standing over the picture of Jesus, you know, on the floor, the little cutout. And then he has almost like a vision of Jesus saying like, do it, basically. I don't think it's literal. It's just more of him coming to terms with this is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. At least for him. And he steps on it. And he lives out the rest of his life. He gets married there in Japan, constantly watched, never to leave. Making sure that he never practices Christianity again.
He can never leave.
And he can never leave. And eventually he dies. And, you know, his wife, you know, gets his funeral ready. They put everything together, a funeral parlor, and then they set it on fire. I assume that's how they did things back then. I don't know. And the camera, you know, slowly zooms in to the fire, and he's in like this little, I don't know what you call it, like a giant cup, covered cup. They zoom inside into his body, and then they check his hand, and in his hand is the little cross that he first received when coming to Japan. And it's sort of a signifier of he continued to practice, but he practiced in silence. Mm-hmm. But he never let his faith leave him. And I thought that was a really powerful ending that really brought everything together.
I agree with you. And I just say, as somebody who isn't actively religious, I think there was some. And again, you don't have to take a literal interpretation of this, or you can, depending on who you are. But if you're somebody that chooses to take the literal way of it, and if you want to believe that the Son of God actually spoke to Rodriguez, there is something comforting and just like satisfying in a way about that moment where this person who's just been put through the ringer is finally allowed to just, it's kind of like, if you take the literal version of this, is that God is saying, or Christ is saying, let's like, look, just do it. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, I saw another video and I found this really interesting. It's that they sort of point out how his journey very much mirrored Christ, and that they had to ultimately the sacrifice, while Christ's sacrifice was the physical, the pain, you know, that was something that our Spider-Man priest could easily do. His sacrifice was something very different. His sacrifice was his faith, in a sense, and having to hide that. But it's something like Jesus, he did for the good of others. And I found that parallel very interesting, and that he did, in a sense, end up living his life very much like Christ, but not in the way that he suspected. You know, it wasn't. You know, in the same way that Jesus' greatest sacrifice was dying, being tortured and dying, that was the most difficult thing that he could do. That wasn't the most difficult thing that the our young priest could do. The most difficult thing that he could do was practice his faith in silence and live out the rest of his life that way. And I found that very fascinating and an interesting parallel.
Yeah, it's I think it's kind of a masterpiece if you ask me, and it's unfortunate that this was summarily ignored by the people who you would think would, are responsible for uplifting films and preserving films and recognizing them, and of course this just got lost in the shuffle for whatever reason. I mean, it's I think it's a hell of a movie. I think it has an important message. Before we go on this, what did you make of the character of Kichichiro?
Oh, the one that would constantly
betray
Rodriguez. That was a very interesting character, and also it is very interesting the way he this also goes along with the whole parallel to Jesus and stuff. While he wanted to live as Jesus, he still viewed himself as above many of the people that he considered his flock.
Yeah.
He considered them below him, and Kichichiro was a big example of this.
He was the lowest of the low.
Yeah. And it wasn't until he made his sacrifice, not his life, but his faith. His religion, his faith, that I think he became more like Jesus, and that his view of the people changed. He no longer saw himself as above others, and because of that, I think you saw a change in the Kichichiro character himself.
Right. That I thought that was so well done, because at a certain point you're just like, this guy again, like, this guy's a piece of shit. Not judging him for what he did initially. I mean, though you can if you want to, but because he repeatedly just fails. But then, that's just kind of humanity, right? Like, and a lot of people, it's like they want forgiveness, but they consistently fail. But it's like, it's in their nature at some point. Not excusing the things that he did, but there is something, I think, truly to what you spoke to about how it wasn't until Rodriguez did the same act that Kichichiro did many years before, to the point where he stooped, or he went down to the lowest of the low, which was something that Christ himself, I think, lived as, where it's like he never, or as the stories that we're told anyway, saw himself above anyone else. Side note, he hated rich people. He hated money, and we're in I couldn't resist, and we're in a society that's obsessed with it. So, and particularly by those who claim to love Christ. So, just putting that out there into the world, people.
Yeah, it's very hypocritical that the people that are very much like, fuck you, I got mine, also seem to be the most religious. It's sort of like, you see it connected to Scorsese. You see it all the time in his films.
Oh, well, Wolf of Wall Street. We just saw the polar opposite of the journey. It's so striking. I saw Wolf of Wall Street. I rewatched it after seeing Silence, and it's just like whoa. It's just like, just seeing. It's like Wolf of Wall Street is the embodiment of what the story anyway of what you would think a Christ figure would despise in every way possible, particularly because it's motivated by fucking greed and money. And you're seeing, and I mean, I guess to Christ's credit, you see how in that example, how people can be so animalistic, shall I say, in their behavior. And whereas in this film, I think if you're somebody of faith, you would find a lot out of this movie. You get a lot out of it. I think if you're not, I think you'd still appreciate out of it. But I think at a certain point, I'm not so sure if you're not somebody of faith, you would get as much out of the film, because I think at times
it's about the journey of faith, and to be fair, it's like there's a lot of movies I've enjoyed that I've never experienced or had to deal with the decisions that this individual within the film is dealing with or deciding. So maybe we're thinking a little too low of like those that have not dealt with those kind of religious experiments. It's a good film. It's a great film. If you like great films, you should watch it.
I agree with you.
Regardless.
I think the last question before we transition on to the other film is like, I mean, did this, what lasting, I think, impact would you say this movie left on you as somebody who comes from a background on religion? Also, why does your dad like it so much?
Yeah, why does he like it so much?
Yeah.
I don't think he knows why he likes things or doesn't like things. I think he's just, like,
Yeah.
I think like most people, they see a movie and they're like, I like it. Or they see a movie, I don't like it. That's the way I think most people are. I think only a very small percentage of people like to dig into film.
Weirdos like us.
Yeah, just complete disgusting losers.
Just check out our ratings.
Yeah, they're awesome. But from what I took about it is, oh boy, I don't know if you can distill it into one thing. It's just sort of the relatable journey of a crisis of faith and, you know, what it means to truly follow or be moral. I think that's very relatable. Again, even if you take away the religious aspects, what it means to be moral. And yeah, that's mostly what I take from
Go
it.
watch it. Go watch it. Heaven knows not enough people watch it. Go watch the fucking thing. Last movie today is Hugo. 11 Academy Award nominations. This was I can't tell you how many ways I loved this film for so many reasons. All I'll say is before I get to Peter's synopsis of the movie, I have loved just about every single last one of Marty's movies. This may be the one that is interesting that Roger Ebert said that, you know, this movie, and I agree with him, this movie may be the most uncharacteristic Marty film he's ever made, but it perhaps it may be the one closest to his heart. And
I think that's why I think it's perfect that we end off with this film.
Yeah, and I mean, it touched my heart more than any of the others personally for me, and why we do all of this and why we love movies and everything. So, Peter, the synopsis for Hugo Cabaret.
One of the most legendary directors of our time takes you on an extraordinary adventure. Orphaned and alone except for an uncle, Hugo Cabaret lives in the walls of a train station in 1930s Paris. Hugo's job is to oil and maintain the station's clocks, but to him, his more important task is to protect a broken automaton and notebook left to him by his late father. Accompanied by the goddaughter of an embittered toy merchant, Hugo embarks on a quest to solve the mystery of the automaton and find a place he can call home. And let me just say, before we get into this, when I saw this film, one, I didn't know it was a Martin Scorsese film.
How would you?
Two, yeah, like it's not the first thing you think of, especially because the way that they marketed it. Because when I saw the marketing, I'm like, oh, it's one of those like cheesy kids films adopted from a young YA novel. Like, it's like, oh, okay.
Because at the time, that was a big thing in 2011.
Yeah. And so it's like when I saw it, I had no idea what the story was. I just thought it was like one of those, and I thought like, well, okay, whatever, just watch it. So I was blown away by the film. I feel like I watched it in like the best possible way because I'm like,
no expectations.
What the fuck? Yeah, like zero expectations, and then to be blown away and to just fall in love with it as much as I did, that was really wonderful. Experience watching. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I could not echo that even more so because I mean I knew it was a Scorsese film, but just the complete and utter shock of what this was. I mean, like as I said, it's the furthest thing away from a Scorsese film because it's a family picture. It's a kids movie in a way, and it's like, who would have thunk it? You know, it's like Scorsese doing a family movie. I saw a interview, I think on I think it was Good Morning America, or it was CBS, one of the two, when the movie was out and it had gotten all these nominations back in 2012-ish, I want to say, when that was ramping up. And of course, this film is based off a book called Hugo, which is based off a real life person, George Méliès, which we'll get to. Oh, we'll get to him, believe me. And Marty was like, I think he was saying that his wife threw the book at him. It's like, here, make a movie that our daughter can watch. Interestingly enough, what I learned about him is...
holy shit, when did he have his daughter?
In his 50s.
Oof, okay.
In his 50s.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think maybe mid 50s if you think about that. He's, I think, right now in his mid 70s. Mid to late 70s right now. Not bad. Something I want to point out, it's like there are a lot of Joe Biden is the worst example of this, but there are a lot of like really energetic 70-year-olds out there, like a Spielberg or a Scorsese or a Bernie Sanders, that if I live to be that age and be as energetic as they are, I mean, wow.
I look at some of these people in their 70s and 80s and I get tired. Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, back to Hugo. Yeah. So he made this movie, something for his daughter. And something that I learned about him is that I think at that time anyway, he would always pick a movie for him and his daughter to go see every single Saturday. Which is, I think, just adorable in the best way possible, because it's just...
he watched a lot of crap then.
Well, I mean, he picks the movies.
Oh, okay.
She doesn't pick
Never
the
mind.
movies. He picks the movies.
Okay.
And, we're talking about Scorsese. We ain't talking about Marvel.
I know. I thought he just like went to the theater.
No. He screened them at his private.
Of course, he has his own home.
Yeah, in his office
theater,
and everything. In his like the Scorsese offices, if you guess, and they have a screening facility and everything. Of course, a theater. That's something to grow up, to have Scorsese pick out the movies you're going to see for you. It's great.
She never saw one Marvel film.
Well, I mean, she's older now. Who knows? Here's the thing. This movie is goddamn amazing. It's not like coming from the sense that, Scorsese makes amazing pictures, which he does. But there's something to be said, because you are right, Peter. In every, when you're looking at this on paper, you think to yourself, okay, Asa Butterfield, Chloe Grace Moretz, okay. At the time, she was like, okay. And you look at the marketing of the movie and you think to yourself, well, this isn't going to be too good, is it? But it's honestly kind of perfect as far as how it's executed, in terms of like what it's trying to honor, who it's trying to honor, and as a, from a characterization standpoint, there is not a bad thing I can say about this movie. The only thing that I can come to a negative is, and it's something that you and I don't care about, and an aspect of why perhaps the film didn't do as well financially, is that at the time, of course, this is after Avatar blew everything off the door with the 3D. A big marketing point about this film was that Scorsese shot the film in 3D. And if you go see the film in 3D, there are certain sequences that really pop, or I think the whole film is supposed to pop even more in 3D. Unfortunately, you and I do not have any kind of appreciation for that technology to care about it. Although I'll say, I don't care about 3D, but I don't mind watching 3D every now and then. And this is a movie I'd absolutely go watch in 3D, because Marty did it. If I ever have the opportunity, which I never will. It looks like, considering where it's going. But that's an interesting aspect. All I'll just say is that, look, everything about this movie is just great, and like there's so many aspects. I just like, one of the things I can gush about is how he chose the color palette. And I was watching a video that pointed this out. Almost every single shot in the movie is just like by teals and browns. a blue teal and a brown color that is just like the color scheme for everything you see in the frame, and how much it just pops and how beautiful it looks. The set of the station is impeccable beyond any kind of word I can use to, praise how beautiful it is. The characters are wonderful. The acting is great. One side thing about this movie that I don't want to get lost is, and I think this is true about almost every single Scorsese film, is how entertaining and how well, in a way, fleshed out the side characters are.
There's a lot of cute little.
There's
side
a lot
characters.
of great side characters here in the film that make this like rail station feel like an actual place beyond people just, getting on and off a train. And you have world-renowned actors. This movie in a big way is honoring George Méliès, who we'll get to, who is a giant in the film industry and film history. But you also have Dracula in this movie. You have Christopher Lee in the film. You can't forget about that, who is unfortunately no longer with us, as well as Richard Griffiths, who is no longer with us. These wonderful actors that we've seen for such a long time being in this. We have Ben Kingsley portraying George Méliès in this film. It's and of course Michael Stuhlbarg was in here as well. Look, this is Scorsese doing a great children's film, which also in and of itself, while being a great children's film, is just a great film for anybody who is a fan of film and cinema.
It's about the magic of film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what a better way to explore the magic of film than through the eyes of a child.
Yeah.
Through where it's like the perfect avenue to tell this type of story. Because the children's films are the best ones, are just filled with magic that transport you. And to view the history of a big chunk of cinema history with this specific director and view it through those eyes, it pulls both the magic, the childlike magic that a lot of these films have, and the magic of cinema, and twists it together to have this just amazing experience. And you understand that Martin Scorsese is like a child when it comes to film. That magic that he still holds, in his mid-70s for filmmaking and what it's capable of doing. And it's on full display. It's a fantastic, fantastic film. And again, it is where it's like the sets are magnificent. It feels unreal.
Yeah,
but to a certain extent, but that's why it works. Yeah. I think,
which is the magic of movies. At a certain point, and I think this can delve into its own sub discussion of which you and I have frequently bitched about, and it seems there's this popular way of thinking and I guess people's quote unquote modern sensibilities, that apparently it's no longer okay to just, suspend belief while watching movies. That movies that claim to be fantasy films be judged by standards that have to be grounded in reality and physics.
In reality, yeah. Oh God, I hate that.
Because that's not what movies ever were, getting into what we see in Hugo is a history of how films arrived. George Méliès is a hero, and he should be a hero to you and I and to everybody who loves movies, because, as they say repeatedly, and this is a figure who I studied in my film class, I'm sure is yours as well, this is the father of movies, I think, as you and I know them to be. Not that he invented the art form, but he was perhaps the first individual that discovered that...
Told stories.
Yeah, that you can tell stories with this medium beyond just, I think, basic, I think, comedy skits or what have you. But they can be artistic. They can be something more than basic stuff.
they can be real cinema.
Of course, you have to go there.
No, but before, film was kind of a novelty.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what? Moving pictures? That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was one of the first, if not the first. Again, my film history is basically almost non-existent, so I'm not going to say for certain, but it seems as if he was one of the first, if not the first, to take this medium of moving pictures and say, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to transport people. I am, you know, he went from a magician putting on a show to a filmmaker putting on a show. And that same magic that he brought to being a magician, bringing that to the new art form of cinema.
Man, I think that says so much. I really do feel it says a lot. The fact that the movies that you and I love most today, or the narratives that you and I enjoy, and most people enjoy, came from the mind from a different industry, from a magician. You know, it came from that per se. And perhaps his masterpiece, and the one that he's remembered for most as far as the films that he made, over 500 movies. And we'll get into what happened to his films, unfortunately, later on in the movie, in this review. But as is seen, or as is mentioned, shall we say, many times throughout Hugo, that Georges Méliès was the director of A Trip to the Moon, which is, again, for anybody who takes a film class, particularly a film history class, one of the very first things that they show you.
It's the film.
It's the film that kind of changed the game. It's like, to me, it's kind of like well, people would think it's blasphemous, but in a way, it's kind of like a modern day, like Star Wars movie or Infinity War, in the way that it revolutionized everything and it changed everything. It was the first of its kind because I think Georges Méliès is the father of visual effects. This is the guy that created these things. And it's like, you have to think for just a couple of moments, and I want people to, I can't let this pass. All of the wonderful films that we have in our lives today, everything from Star Wars to us, like to this day and age, like Infinity War and Endgame. If you love those movies, great. We wouldn't have any of that if it wasn't for Georges Méliès. He created this way of telling not just narratives, but visually stunning narratives. At that, and when you watch A Trip to the Moon, you just see it then and there. It's just like, wow, like the imagination, the creativity that he had to create such a bombastic and outlandish thing, but in and of itself is a great film.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's, and, you know, talking about like reality or not reality, you know, within the film, they make it very clear, like, films are a place of imagination. Like, this is, you know, film is an opportunity not to put stories in a box, but to crack open that box and take it wherever it does. Like, Trip to the Moon. That's the correct word.
Right.
Sorry, I always mix them up. The most famous picture that you have is like the bullet-like ship landing on the moon with a big old face in it. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Obviously not shooting for realism, but shooting for escapism.
Also, one aspect about that film, Trip to the Moon, that cannot be overstated, because this is the very early 1900s. This is a good, decades before color was introduced in the movie. This picture some of it is in color because they painted over the photos.
Yeah. They go frame by frame and color it in.
I can only imagine how frustrating that must, painstaking it must have been to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's such a love and devotion to the films. Even now, it's got to be at least like 100 years since that film was made.
Easily.
And you can still pop it in and just see the love and the imagination and the talent and the masterwork behind that film and his other films. Like, it's a beautiful thing. it really is. Again, this film, Hugo, is a celebration of cinema and the magic of it, and it's executed so well. Of course, Martin Scorsese. That it's particularly for people like you and me, it's hard not to just go like, I fucking love this film. It's hard not to do that.
No, and then also while we're celebrating, of course, George Méliès as and interestingly enough, George Méliès, of course, as we've been discussing, is a real life figure, but the story that is told here is based off a interpretation, a narrative novel, if you will, based off George Méliès. But unfortunately, as is the case with humanity, we just have this persistent and stubborn arrogance and ignorance about our reality and our history that, for whatever reason, some of the people who have given their all, especially in the arts, not that it's just to that industry, but perhaps in many cases, people who've truly revolutionized the way that our culture is and the pleasures that we enjoy in our lives. This man died a penniless man. What parts of it were real in his life is nobody wanted his movies anymore because tastes change, and that's just the cold hard truth of it. But he went back home to France, Paris. He had a toy shop in a railway station, and he died in the 1930s. And it's it's just something about life, and my family always, and my mother always says, is that it's really a shame that we never really can honor people when they're alive. We always have to wait until they die to just say how great somebody is when they're no longer around to hear it. And it's something that's true and hellish about our existence, that people like this are treated in this fashion. But it's also, I think, it speaks to the true magic of storytelling, and something that I take away from the Saving Mr. Banks film from Disney, and what Walt Disney was about is that, aren't you tired of remembering it that way? In which what storytellers can do is we can change, in a way, the pain, not take it away entirely, but to tell a different story with it. How about, for a change, let's remember a version in which Méliès was celebrated in his final days. And in that way, we can celebrate ourselves and film, and which is what the book did, and what the film definitely did in that regard. Because when you see Ben Kingsley, beautiful performance as always by Ben Kingsley as George Méliès, you see him in this movie, and very subtle touches of pain all over his face. And then, of course, when he's telling his story, and of course, when we get to the end of the film where he is being awarded with some sort, and they found these movies, but I mean, just the pain of it, and I can only assume this was true, where they say that he was forced to sell his movies. He made over 500 of them, and they melted the film strips down to make shoe heels. And I thought to myself, boy, if that's probably the best representation of what we do as society as ever. The fuck is wrong with us that we take such wonderful things and we destroy them? I think it speaks to a culture that's obsessed with money more than anything. Of course, that's where it has to turn to. And this person should never, in my view, and in your view, I'm sure you think so as well, should never been in a position to have done that. And it's a shame of how many wonderful things were just literally were melted down to create shoe heels. Oh, God.
The disgusting way in which we do kind of like, fuck this person, and then we only ever really give them their due once they're gone, and we're like, oh, hey, remember when this person was great? What happened to them? Oh, they're dead and they died tragically. Like that I can also chop up to human nature, and it's that we if we have something, we really don't value it
Until it's gone.
it's until it's gone. And I think that's something that's entirely consistent. We do that with people, we do that with things, we do that with opportunities. It's just like we grow accustomed to it, and then we take it for granted. And it's not good. It's not good. And I think if we fight that tendency as much as we can, we will be better overall.
Right.
We'll value what we have better and who we have. Yeah, including film and the wonderful people that make those films.
Well, it's just like, in our discussions about film, we just, we think about how many, you had discussed this, right? Because, in this movie, we have the example of really, like the father of film, in a way. Many of his movies were destroyed for that purpose. You can't help but wonder if that's ever going to happen again. Because as, we talk about the film industry just about every single week and how it's changing. But like, can we ever rule out, because we had a discussion, I think, the other night about how, because our culture has changed so much, particularly our social media internet culture, would there even be the potential for films like, let's say, Silence or other films that didn't perhaps find an audience, like Dr. Sleep, it looks like, find an audience in today's day and age, but could perhaps find audiences down the road, as films that we have discussed on this network have. And it just speaks to the ever-changing mold of the industry. I mean, we just found out that the right-wing Justice Department is going to attempt to overturn the Paramount Decree, which is going to allow the studios to buy their own movie theaters again. Because, well, of course, because, I mean, like, it worked so well the first time, right? And it's like, you just have to... I think it's also in a way a cautionary tale, because like we're living in a time, and we're living in precarious times where the future of this industry is very much in question. How do you feel about all of that?
I mean, obviously, you know how I'm going to feel about that. I think that's beyond disgusting. I think it's going to further the downfall of the film industry to where like two companies are going to control it. You're going to get the same movies from like the same two companies, and it's probably going to boil down to just a competition between two companies. Disney and I don't know, like AT&T, isn't there like a merger between AT&T and Comcast or something like that?
No, there was a AT&T and Time Warner, which created Warner Media.
Time Warner.
Warner Media.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that right there. God. All of it's no bueno. All of it's going to usher in a new way of going to the film that from where I'm standing right now does not look good.
And I think it's only proper to mention this, not because I'm a partisan and a political ideologue, although people would certainly reason as to why I'm bringing this up, but I think it's the fucking truth that this continuously happens every time there is a Republican president, particularly a conservative president, that allows these fucking mergers to happen and these acquisitions to happen. And with the complete removal of any antitrust laws, this continuously happens every single fucking time. And for any show out there that covers this topic and doesn't mention the fact that Reagan, as we continuously say, fucked over the film industry back in the 80s because of deregulating the hell out of everything, as well as perhaps Trump, who his Department of Justice is going to pursue the overturning of this Paramount Decree. You can look it up and find out more information about that. It needs to be pointed out that that the GOP is largely responsible for what Peter and I may presume to be the end and the death of cinema. So that is relevant to the issue. But going back to Hugo, one particular scene that's, I think, definitely straight out of Marty's heart is where Hugo and God, I forget the character's name. I think Chloe Grace Moretz. They sneak into a movie theater, right? And they're watching this film. And I think, again, there's so many wonderful things about movies and how magical they are. I mean, that movie they were watching was silent, you know, and some films didn't need to cut away to like Modern Times cuts away to like cue cards of like what would be said. The film doesn't, and I think it also speaks to a certain sense of magic that films like the ones that Méliès made didn't need that. You could watch the movie with no dialogue and get exactly what the intention is out of those films. And I think somebody said that if you put this movie on mute, the way that the actors move and how it's shot, it evokes the same sense of that those films did beforehand. Other aspects that people mentioned about the movie was how this film has a 4-act structure versus a 3-act structure that is commonly, you know, just about every film. The first act, obviously, the introduction of the railway station. The second act is when he meets Chloe Grace Moretz. The third act is when we get into the whole background of Méliès. And the fourth act is the thing with the railway station. And you know what's another aspect I wanted to point out, you know, in terms of the side characters, there was something, and this gets into the central character who is Hugo Cabaret, who is orphaned. And again, something about what these movies do is it's really eye-opening. And this is the 1930s and this shit still happened, where it's like, okay, so it's like, ooh, what happens to these orphans? Well, I guess they're kind of not in a good place, and unfortunately, by the way, Asa Butterfield's great. I mean, I'm not sure if it needed to be mentioned, but he's great in this.
I was gonna say she.
Jude Law plays his father. He dies in a museum fire, and he gets sent off to live with his drunk uncle, who also gets himself killed later on in the movie, although off screen, obviously. But he lives in this railway station, and the entire time he is being chased, if not hunted, by Sacha Baron Cohen's character, the Inspector General, who was interesting, right? Because this did not go the way I thought it was going to be. I thought, you found like a nefarious villain trope person who is just there for like, I guess, comic relief and everything, which was great. I mean, great comedy. Baron Cohen does great. But in some striking way, there was depth to even that side character, to where it's like, his whole thing in the movie is he's locking up orphans. He's, arresting them and getting them sent away. But then you find out that he was an orphan. And there's something to that. And there's this wonderful moment in I guess what you would consider a climax of the film, where Hugo is caught by the Inspector General. And Hugo is just breaking down, like, basically, this is my chance. This is my chance to, in Hugo's way, this is his chance to, fix something that's broken. And about Hugo's thing in this movie is that he doesn't feel anything worse about a machine that can't do what it's intended to do, about its purpose. And so that's very much something that's on his mind, because he's holding the automaton. But something that's also just unsaid, although definitely delivered in that performance, in that exchange, which is then reacted by Baron Cohen, how struck and emotional. I mean, there are tears in that inspector's eyes, because he realizes, oh, well, yeah, because I was an orphan too, and I never had my chance at finding a family. But this kid does. And I'm going to rob him of that? Like, that was something that was just weirdly emotional, but great as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great emotional moments throughout the film. That being one of them. It's really well done.
Yeah, the film's great. Go watch it, please. For so many reasons. It's also, I mean, this is the one that I saw twice. I saw it and I had to see it again. Love it. And don't be surprised if you hear this movie being mentioned on a future planned show we have.
Ooh, okay.
Don't be surprised. I'm still let's just say it's difficult for me because I think of this and I also think of like bum ba da bum bum. So there's your clue. There's your clue about that. I don't know if that made it clear about what it is I'm thinking about, but
yeah,
it's difficult because I love it so much. But if there's nothing else to say, this will be the end of the podcast. This is actually also the end of our Scorsese files. I want to say, look, we began this journey, if you will, with me only having seen like one Scorsese movie, and we ended this with me having seen a total of 13 Scorsese films. And if we're going to close this off, again, we're leading up to The Irishman. We're going to be doing The Irishman once it drops on the 27th, and then we'll have a review promptly after that. But it's like, I am just so grateful that I came around to seeing these movies at exactly this time. You know, his films, in such a striking and unexpected way, are truly inspiring in terms of like what an auteur and what a giant that Scorsese is. And I think mostly of all, it's like there's just something so just beautifully authentic and genuine and loving about this guy and how he makes his movies, and how great they are. And I think, you know, when you have somebody who is a true cinephile who just loves movies, and I love that man. I really do. Like, he's really, like, anytime he does something, I am there. Like, I can't think of anybody else really in terms of the consistency of greatness that comes out of this man. And I really hope that Irishman isn't the last movie he makes, because as we've seen with just this episode, some of my favorite films that he's made just come from this batch of movies that we've reviewed. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it, Peter. I hope you all enjoyed I think our longest streak of positive conversations, I think maybe in the history of Red Spotlight. I don't recall a time where we haven't really been at all negative. That'll change pretty soon. Sorry. But at least for the time being, or maybe it won't. We'll have some good movies coming up. I do want to say that we will review Dolomite in December. We got behind on that because we have other things that happened, but that'll be coming, as well as reviews for Knives Out and Jojo Rabbit and other movies that'll be coming out next month. And of course, Irishman. But yeah, I had a blast doing this series. You have anything else to add about Scorsese or anything, Mr. Martinez?
He, as a director, is someone I love. He has made great films. He has demonstrated a great love of cinema, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing his Irishman, with which we will come back and tell you whether there's a post-credit scene for the Scorsese universe in it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for listening. As a reminder, you can listen to our podcasts anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere, you name it, every single Sunday and sometimes on Thursdays. Thank you all so much again for listening. Thank you, Peter, for being here. Thank you, Marty, for existing. Thank you for these movies. Thank you so much. And keep it here under the spotlight for more. And until next time, bye-bye.